Hello and welcome everybody to this week's edition of the Founders Pod. I'm here with my co-host Jordan Hansen and Matt Lamb. My name is Brandon Miner. Appreciate the time that everybody's taken out of their day to spend with us on this week's edition. We're excited to bring a guest that I've known for a little bit of time, not too long, but we're excited to hear his story. The guest that we have today is Dan Bennatt. Dan is owner of JDB Capital, and he's been doing that since the year of 2002 to present, so 20 years, and we're excited to have him on. And Dan, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me.
Awesome. So, Dan, we're excited to hear your story. So, for a couple of reasons. Number one, I don't know almost anything about investment banking. And so we're excited to hear kind of the ins and out of what that entails and kind of what, your job is. But for our listeners to get started, if you could just introduce yourself and introduce your company and what you do for your company.
Sure. So Dan Bennatt, JDB Capital Partners is a firm that I founded after having worked both in investment banking, and we define investment banking as uh, advising on mergers and acquisitions, on growth financings for companies, typically under the umbrella of corporate finance. So both equity, debt, mezzanine debt, different types of financing instruments. And then had that investment banking background, and then along with private equity. So when we're on the other side of the table, directly investing other, institutional investors' money into privately held companies.
Oh, I have so many questions, Dan. Okay, so is that two entities, the investment side and then the other side that's
Private equity,
advising?
yeah, it's kind of there's definitely a Chinese wall between the two.
Okay.
The combination of both is the industry term is called merchant banking.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so that's what we do today. But my career started on the investment banking side, and so I really cut my teeth into that, and then saw a lot of individuals, entrepreneurs, and private equity funds as we would sell their business through a merger or an acquisition or something along those lines. Saw them exiting those businesses, and I thought that would be really interesting to be on the other side of the table. So
Got
then
it.
got into the private equity side of things with some different firms.
So investment banking, at strictest definition, simple, maybe something my mom would understand. It's really just helping companies buy and sell each other.
That's one aspect of it, yes. The other aspect of it is think of investment bankers also raise capital, whether it's through public markets and IPOs. It could be in large high yield debt deals that we hear about, these large companies taking on, and everything from on that corporate finance side of things, all the way then to doing also the mergers and acquisitions. Usually those are two different groups. Sometimes they overlap depending on the size of the firm, but all under the investment banking umbrella.
So it was always my understanding that investment bankers got involved when you're ready to go public, like IPO. Is
That's
that a smaller portion of investment banking, or is that a more common activity for investment bankers?
it's I would say it used to be a lot more common for companies to go public before the rise of private equity, but with private equity, it's really taken a lot of share from the IPO market. So investment bankers will give companies, entrepreneurs, board of directors guidance on what is the best direction for them from a maximizing valuation, what kind of liquidity needs do you need, for what purposes. And sometimes that might be an IPO, sometimes it might be private equity, sometimes it might be another source of capital to fund whatever those needs are, whether it's liquidity for shareholders, whether it's growth capital for the business, whether it's funding an acquisition. There's lots of different needs for corporate finance.
So who is your ideal customer? Like when you're looking for customers, first, I want to talk about how you even look for customers for this kind of thing. But who is your ideal customer? I mean, a revenue over a certain amount, probably. Um,
Yes.
yeah. Well, over
Yeah,
like 50
usually,
million or
it
smaller even.
depends. Like for us, it's companies generally speaking with 10 million to probably 300 or 400 million of revenue.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's companies that if they're looking to sell their business, that's one opportunity. And or if they're looking to buy companies, look to grow through acquisitions, is another good opportunity. And then one is if they're looking to grow their business, but they don't want to sell. So then we can help either facilitate
Debt or
bringing
equity.
third-party capital in or our own capital.
And how do you find these customers, Dan? I mean, are you looking somewhere to see them pop up on a list, or are you reaching out? How do you find them?
Over the years, we've tried a number of different things where we had business development folks within our group, and then so that they were reaching out based on targeted research that we would do we would get a list of companies in our region because we're more regionally focused. We'll do transactions across the nation, but more regionally focused. So we've done that. We also participate in a lot of organizations or networking organizations, but I would say the majority of it just comes from referrals from what we call intermediaries, people who have access and relationships to entrepreneurs who are in usually a position of guidance or advisory or service work some kind. So it could be their attorneys, it could be their accountants, it might be their insurance advisors that they have good relationships with their those teams, those owners, and as they're sharing what they're looking to do, and sometimes they will make those referrals.
I mean, but that's what you do now. I mean, when you started, it's not like you weren't getting a ton of referrals because you probably weren't as well known. So that's probably when you're using more of the business development kind of.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
To get started, I was knocking on doors, going to every networking event, trying to, call on every attorney who would see me or accountant or anybody who would have any influence with any businesses. So I beat the streets pretty hard at first,
right.
Especially as I was 28 or 29 at the time. And a lot of entrepreneurs don't want to listen to kids that old.
Yeah, that's a hard thing.
Yeah.
Now your revenue, it's got to come. It's just a percentage of the transaction is probably how it's structured.
Correct. So on the investment banking side, it's a percentage of if it's the amount of capital you raise or if it's a transaction value of a merger and acquisition. So that's generally the formula. And on the private equity side, where you're making direct investments into businesses, then it's your return on capital. And if you're using third-party capital, then it's a carried interest, a management fee and a carried interest.
Yeah, fascinating.
A question I have, Dan, is this is going to be a dumb question, I'm sure. Number one, when you're looking at investment banking, if I'm looking to sell my business, why would I consider an investment banker over a business broker or like another service that helps sell my company?
A good question.
It's a great question.
Yeah, absolutely. So my experience with business brokers are they generally also work in real estate, and they can't go very deep into the business to understand how to maximize the valuation of it. And they generally don't have experience into going to directly targeting certain particular buyers. And I'll give you a couple examples. So we would meet businesses that were, entrepreneurial in nature. And when we would go, we would look and do due diligence on the business. So we go really deep in their financials to understand the business, understand, their customers, their margins, all the major key drivers of the business. And then we would look at and say, well, what is, how are we going to maximize get the maximum valuation from this? What are we going to highlight? Where are the opportunities for improvement? Where are the strengths, where are the weaknesses? And we would highlight a lot of those things. And oftentimes we would work with the companies to fix a couple of things that could significantly increase their value along the way. Whereas a business broker is going to take some limited information and it's basically just what the company gives them. And oftentimes our experience is what they're getting from the company is not very sophisticated because they're really good at what they do. Whether it's selling widgets or a service or something like that, but they're not really good at translating all the KPIs of their business to someone else to make a very educated and informed decision. And so a lot of times value gets lost in that translation.
That's interesting. I mean, you're 100% right. I mean, the business broker, from my experience, and I've seen listings, but essentially they just want to be like an intermediary board of listings that you can just look at available companies, see some basic metrics, and then talk to the business owner. But if I were to sell my company, I don't know necessarily the metrics that would help, I don't know, improve my transaction, right? Improve the sale transaction. So I guess what an investment banker or your type of service would provide would come in and work with me for a few weeks and kind of prepare my business, understand that, to present it to the market. That would help me have a better representation out in the market than just sort of me listing my sales numbers and gross income, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And sometimes the best thing to do if a company is leaving a lot of value on the table is to pause and make some changes.
Mm-hmm.
And in some instances, we worked with companies that were looking to sell. And, an example was, I think they had actually received an offer for about $10 million. And they had, quite a bit of debt on the business, maybe 5 or 6 million of debt. And so the net was going to be $3 or $4 million after taxes, a couple $1 million left. The gentleman was 42 years old. Like, I'm not sure that, what are you going to do with that money? What are you going to do next? And, after, going through some of those questions and iterations with them, he said, look, it's probably based on, your business and where you're at today, maybe you should look at growing and not selling. And so, long story short, we ended up working with them over a period of about 5 years, and we sold the business for about $300 million.
Oh my God.
Dan.
Okay, Dan, do that with me. Like, let's do that.
Well, it's, there's a lot of hard work and
Yeah.
but in this particular case, matter of fact, Brandon, it's very similar to the insurance space. Even though this was an industrial services company, there was lots of arbitrage in buying businesses.
Oh, right. Okay.
Because we could buy businesses at 4 to 5 times, and with scale, we were worth 10 times.
You're rolling it up. That's what you're doing.
Exactly. And so, but there was a lot of infrastructure that particular business needed, such as some pretty significant increase in, in the financial side of the business, human resources, because it was, a lot of heavy service, a lot of infrastructure that needed to be built. So we took an equity stake in the business, and then also did advisory work in order to pull these things together. And so
I was gonna say, I mean, that's
5-year sales cycle. I was like,
yeah,
no way.
that's a long
Yeah,
time.
no,
Okay, that's a little different scenario. Got it.
Exactly. So there's a handful of stories that, like that. I think that's the largest one that we've, size wise, but there's been a couple others where, 20 million evaluation, pause a couple of years, we 70. Another one was, I think that was the vet care business. There was another one in the e-commerce business that was looking at 12 or 13. I think we got them 50.
Oh, wow.
But those are all pausing and doing something, fundamentally different in the business, and then being able to articulate it after implementing some of those changes.
Yeah, I mean, a business broker, they want the commission on the sale as soon as possible. I mean, they're really not looking to take any sort of partnership position in that business. Obviously, they just want the transaction to go through.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
so wait. Before I have one further question before we
Okay.
go into the background. Now, industry. I mean, do you have certain industries you focus on, or because you really have to know like all business. I mean, if you're doing all industries, you have a really good business background, but trying to understand those businesses intimately, that's hard.
That's a good question. So I cut my teeth in what's called the FIG space. That stands for Financial Institutions Group. So I started off in a very narrow vertical of banks, insurance companies, specialty finance companies, things of that nature, and then when I transitioned in investment banking into private equity, which was more of a generalist firm that I was with, I had to learn a lot of different industries, and which have its own nuances with inventory and manufacturing or service or software or so through that process got to learn and be exposed to a number of different types of businesses, which a lot of them have a number of same fundamentals. But if you can get to the key, the major KPIs of a business, then you can really understand what the drivers are, along with kind of the macro environment, the industry, the customer demand. What are the drivers of that? It's easier to say what we stay away from, and that's things that are really hard for us to get our arms around. So anything that is super high tech, like say a new semiconductor technology, we cannot understand if that's going to be better from one technology to the next, right? So it's going to be more of your basic blocking and tackling types of businesses. I mean, software is an easy one, just because there's usually a demand for it. We don't have to understand the code behind it, what the needs are, what the demands are, what the competitive landscape looks like. But things like in healthcare, services, pretty straightforward. Getting the drugs and research and R&D, that's a different story.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Are there any like new, do you shy away from like new emerging technologies in general?
Yes.
Okay. So like
Yes,
the fusion technology energy landscape that's just developing and stuff, you guys don't really see emerging markets like that and aggressively attack them, right?
No, and that's, look, I tried when I was younger.
Yeah.
I thought, everything was pretty sexy and sounded good. And so through a little bit of trial and error, definitely learned that, wow, if I can't get my arms around it, or I can't get, an expert that can give me a 100% opinion on why this technology is better than the next, or it's going to, or it's going to work, then I'm just, might as well go to Vegas.
Yeah.
I have
Right.
better
Sure.
odds.
That
So,
makes sense. Well, awesome.
So the simple answer is no, we stay away from early stage technology or not unproven, but early stage pre-revenue or mild revenue. It's just not our cup of tea.
So, and then before so we're going to jump into your background here pretty soon and where you grew up and your experience there. But do you have a preference as far as private equity versus the investment banking side, like you personally?
I personally enjoy private equity. I really enjoy both sides of it, to be completely, frank. I mean, I love the advisory side of it. There's a lot of strategy to it, especially when we're looking at doing the arbitrage deals like we're doing in our insurance partnership, and then how to finance those, the most efficient way to maximize your returns for all the stakeholders, and execution of that. I find fun. It's intellectually challenging and stimulating, and so to me that's enjoyable. But if I had to lean to one area over the other, I would say private equity, just because you're a little bit more in control of your destiny. Because you've already it's usually you're forming a partnership with someone that you've gotten to know over the course of due diligence, and you really have aligned incentives on exactly what you want to do. Sometimes in the investment banking world, emotions can come into play with entrepreneurs and owners who may change their mind, or who may not have the same morals and character as you do. And so those lead to some challenges that aren't, the most ideal thing that I like about the investment banking side.
Yeah. No, I can
Because you
understand
can
that.
put, as like you were just talking about a sales cycle, sometimes on average, if you're going to do a merger or an acquisition, if you want to sell someone's business and you want to do it properly, it's probably going to take 6 to 9 months at a minimum, to do the right amount of due diligence, run the right process, and then for the seller or the buyer to do their process. So you can waste a significant amount of time for someone to change their mind or not follow through,
Yeah.
or have been hiding something that you couldn't find out.
Yeah, that all makes sense. I mean, the sales process is such an intimate process for For an entrepreneur, I mean, you open up the closet and some things fall out. And like you said, if you find that in month number 7, it can be a frustrating experience for sure. All right, Dan. So we're gonna not get too much further into the specifics, but we want to jump back into your life and kind of find out a little bit more about what led you into this career. And so right now you're in Arizona, but where did you grow up originally?
So I grew up in a town called Tomball, Texas. It was in Tomball. It was a small town. Now it's pretty much a suburb of Houston. If you guys probably have never been there or heard of it. Yeah, it was, it was a great place to, like to say, be from.
But not to live in. Yeah.
No, not. I mean, look, I had a great childhood. I really enjoyed it. I grew up like you guys did. All together, I had a really close group of guys that I went from kindergarten through high school with. That we all stay in touch, and good group of guys. But just the lifestyle there, and for what I wanted to do, wasn't too exciting for forever.
So Texas, I mean, traditionally, if you're born and raised in Texas, you're always a Texan, right?
Yep.
Is that what it is for you? I mean, Texas
Absolutely.
all the way? Yeah.
No, I definitely have a lot of pride being from Texas.
Yeah.
Still, I'm still go back quite a bit, have family and friends there and enjoy it. But yeah, so I'll always be a Texan.
So describe kind of your childhood growing up. What did your parents do, and how long were they in that town? Are they still there? I mean, what is that story like?
No. So moved to Tomball from Houston, I don't know, little 3 or 4 years old, and pretty rural area where I grew up. So grew up with horses and animals and stuff like that, and which I think also gave me a lot of of a good work ethic, because we were always helping each other out, whether it was building fences or baling hay, or start mowing grass for pastures for some of our friends and neighbors, and at an early age. And so no, it was great. And then just the school atmosphere, just the small town atmosphere, it's something that I've wanted to replicate, but I think it was a different time, different era, different place, for my own kids. But my dad had a small machine shop that focused on the oil and gas industry. So a lot of, think metal bending and welding and valves and pipelines and stuff like that. And so when I was old enough to start working there, I quit, doing the mowing and all that kind of stuff in the summer times as much. And then I would work in the shop. And so that definitely taught me what I didn't want to do.
Would he take those his stuff out to the rigs, or was this just shipped out to different oil sites all over the country or all over Texas?
It was shipped out all over. Basically, what these products were think of an industrial gas pump, something to a mechanism that would take fluid from a stationary unit, a holding tank, to a mobile unit, whether that be a train, a truck, or a ship. So those metal pieces and valves and joints and things like that in between.
And so you never thought, all right, I'm going to go into work with my dad all the way, bring it on, right?
No.
No.
No, that's a matter of fact, I think fear is a really good motivating factor for success and drive. And that's one of the fears that I had, is I did not want to go back and have to work with my dad. Love my dad, learned a lot of great things, from him and working there, but really wanted to do my own thing. And so that was, pretty big motivating factor. I did not want to do that.
Yeah.
Did you have siblings, Dan?
I had a half brother and a half sister.
Okay.
We didn't grow up together though. They were, I think, 7 years and 13 years older than me. But for the most part, pretty much grew up as an only child.
So it was just you working alongside your dad. It wasn't like splitting chores with older or younger brothers or sisters.
That's still a rub with me, my dad. I give him crap all the time, because I would have to. It would take me about 8 hours to mow the yard.
Wait.
I mean,
What?
he's not in the field.
Is
yet.
this
It's
a
not just
yard? This
Well,
is what
that's
is
gotta
the
be-
yard?
Because you had the driveway was a couple hundred yards long, and so you had to edge around that, mow around that. And there was a pasture piece. And
This
there was
wasn't a
another
golf course,
pasture.
right?
Yeah,
8
and
hours.
so in Texas, that part of Texas, especially when during the rainy season, I mean, you would have to do about every 5 or 6 days. So I
Oh,
couldn't even get
wow.
away with it. So
Wow.
and then the funny thing is, when I went to college, he got a yard crew.
Of course.
Yeah,
Got
so
a
I
crew,
ran
yeah.
the yard
Had a crew.
for a very long time.
Dan was a good yard crew when he was there.
That's right.
That's
Absolutely.
funny.
8
you
hours.
play-
It's like,
Did you play sports growing up, Dan?
I did. Our high school was pretty limited in sports, but we had the major sports and baseball, basketball, football, track, and might have had tennis, but I played baseball and football growing up.
Yeah. So your childhood work wise, was it strictly you're working with your dad, or did you have any other jobs in the community or anything else that you remember?
No other direct jobs other than jobs that we would do for just labor. When I was started probably around 11, 12 years old, somebody would pay us to go lay grass or help fix some fence or go bale hay, things like that. So I would do odd jobs like that. And then a buddy and I had we had a little lawn route that we would do for some of the neighbors for a while.
Yeah. Surprised that you had that much time left over to mow other people's lawns after doing in between your own.
Right.
That's funny.
did you have like a
We
walk?
got pretty good at it. Man, that's why I moved to Arizona and I have rock. I'm surrounded by rocks. I
Traumatized.
definitely don't do yard work anymore.
Yeah, like edging. When you see people edging lawns, are you just like PTSD and you like run away and?
Yes, absolutely.
Well, I'm sure
I
your
never want to
kids.
see another weed eater.
I'm sure your kids work just as hard as you to take care of the lawn, right? Is that?
Yeah, they definitely got to skip that one.
Yeah, that's
Which
funny.
I wish I actually, because it did instill a lot of good work ethic and
Yeah.
I think a lot of grit. But yeah, I wish they would have had a little bit more of that experience.
See, Dan, when we were growing up, Brandon had a pretty big yard.
Yeah.
And for him to get done faster, he called me up. I hauled my riding mower over to his house and we tag teamed it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Matt, I may have forgot to mention I did do that a few times.
There you
because
go.
We, I think maybe by the time I was 10 or 11, we had a pool. That was the only pool within miles. So
There
got
you
my
go.
buddies to come over. Oh, I got to mow real quick.
Yeah.
So let's
Get
get
on
somebody on the push mower, somebody on the ride lawnmower,
Yeah.
somebody would, start weed eating, and I'd grab the tractor or something. So,
Yeah. And then you're like, talk to you in 3 hours, right? Like, when you're done, we'll go. That's funny.
well,
So-
it only works for so long before they kind of figure out that.
Then you start losing friends.
They would drive by, and if my yard wasn't mowed, they weren't coming over.
Yeah, exactly. Right. That's funny. Oh, that's good. Well, so I guess then transitioning on to education, I mean, you said motivation wise, it was important to you that you were not going to be, was it just blue collar or like machine shop career? And I mean, it sounds like you had a fairly clear vision of what you didn't want to do. What was the motivation of what you did want to do?
Well, it's interesting because my dad, I was the first person in my family to go to college. And so my dad, trying to get guidance from him and our neighbors and everything were blue collar. So it didn't have a lot of guidance on what to do. My dad's like, well, go to school, you should do accounting. That's the smartest guy I know is my accountant.
Yeah.
He knows, everything. And so that was kind of the guidance. And so I didn't know I really didn't know what I didn't want to do, but I know what I didn't want to be and I didn't want to do. So went in there with that mindset to the school. And then over time, actually did an internship in accounting after doing accounting for 2 years. And almost having enough credits to graduate, did an internship in it. I'm like, I don't think I want to do this.
Yeah.
This is not fun.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I think, so my thought process was, I don't want to be the one preparing the financials and I want to be someone on the other side of the table doing something with them, in my simplistic view of the world at that time. And so I stayed in college for another year and got my finance degree. And as I was exploring different industries, investment banking was one of them. So that's where I really then said, okay, I want to do that. That
And
sounds
From
cool.
the beginning, you knew investment banking, like right out of college. You're like, okay, yeah, this is where I want to go.
I didn't know about investment banking until my fifth year, because my fourth
Mhm.
year, after 3 years, thinking I was going to be an accountant, and did the internship, and then I'm like, well, no, I'm going to stay another year and get accounting and finance. But it was kind of that fifth year or fourth year that I really decided investment banking is what I want to do, and so that's why I stayed around for another year to get my finance degree.
so
That's
sometimes, oh, sorry, sometimes we talk to people and they say, numbers always came easy to me. Was that your type of scenario? Did you have to work hard at it, or was it always something that, debits and credits on the accounting side and the financials always came easy to you?
Yeah, math always came easy, fortunately. I mean, I was not a great student in high school. I mean, I think I had straight A's in math, but everything else was a little suspect.
Yeah. Okay. So and then where did you go to college?
University of Texas.
Nice, University of Texas. And then what year was the time where you were graduating?
So I was there from 90 to 95.
95. So it's fascinating that you selected investment banking. I know when I was in college, I was in the business school, and maybe I didn't look into it enough. But was that like a common study of, or a subject of study at University of Texas, or did you have a mentor or somebody that kind of led you in that direction at all, or just on your own?
It was mainly on my own. I was looking at a lot of the job boards, back then, because there was no, centralized internet posting of jobs, and kept seeing this, investment banking, mergers and acquisitions, New York. And I'm like, well, I'm going to look into that a little bit more. So then I went and talked to a an advisor in the finance side of school, and where they shared with me what investment banking was and how much money they made. And I said, okay, I think that sounds a lot better than the route I was going down. So um, that little diligence there, and paid off.
Yeah, I bet.
now. Let's be honest, Dan. How much? I mean, I think salary motivates people always, right? And to a wide degree, but sometimes it's very highly motivating, and sometimes it's not as motivating. It always plays a part. Do you feel like it was a big motivation? I mean, were you financially minded, financially driven?
Yes,
Yes.
absolutely.
I mean, it
I did.
kind of
No,
with school
I had
too.
a goal in my mind in college, because at that time, um, how I grew up, a lot of the men, I mean, over the hill at 40, you were over the hill. Those guys were old and beat up and
Mm.
not in the best shape, and things of that nature. And so I had it in my mind that by the time I was 40, I was going to be retired if I wanted to. So that was kind of a goal that I'd set for myself. And because of the thought process of, gosh, I want to be able to enjoy life and everything. But, you know, as I had moved out of Texas and understood, a lot of health and things, there's a lot more life after 40
Yeah.
than the way that those guys lived it.
Sure.
That's interesting because a lot of times, the culture that you grow up in, you aspire to, right? And you kind of see,
Mhm.
but you kind of were able to look at that and say, health wise and the way, hard labor, sometimes what it could do to you is kind of affect your quality of life after a certain age. And you tried to avoid that.
Correct.
It's kind of interesting.
Mhm.
What was your first job coming out of college then?
So first job was with a firm called Alex Sheshanoff and Company, and they were the only investment banking firm in Austin. And I wanted to stay in Austin because of a girl.
There you go. Yeah.
So right, so and who we ended up eventually getting married a year later. But so yeah, so Alex Sheshanoff and Company. And the interesting thing is that they wouldn't hire me as an investment banker; they would hire me as an accountant.
Oh, okay. All right.
But strategically, So, and when I did my interview, the accounting department was right next to invest. They also had a consulting group. And so I'm like, okay, I'm going to get into accounting, but I'm somehow going to will my way into the investment banking side. It took me about 6 months, but it worked.
Oh, okay. Not too
Well,
long
that's
of
not
a
bad.
road.
Yeah.
What was Austin like in like the 95 and the mid 90s? I mean, Austin's always been a kind of center of Texas for growth and development and business. I mean, was that the heyday of Dell and some of those big corporations?
Absolutely it was. And I really, really enjoyed Austin. I mean, it was an incredible lifestyle. We lived right off of Lake Austin. Our neighborhood had a boat dock, and I would wakeboard before work
Oh,
sometimes,
okay.
afterwards. And from where we were is about a 10-minute drive to downtown where we worked. Um, and it was great. Now that, it's a lot different. That same drive is probably 40 minutes,
Oh, yeah.
just from traffic
Yeah,
but still a great place. Love Austin.
yeah. And then how did that career develop?
Um, Went well. It was my springboard into private equity. So I was there for about 3 years. And at that time, typically what you would do in investment banking, and it's still kind of the case now, is if you would start out as your undergrad, and then you were expected to go get your MBA after about 2 years. So you start out as an analyst. Um, I had a pretty strong work ethic, so I mean, I probably worked 80 to 90 hours a week.
Oof.
So I like to say I got about, 5 years experience in those 3 years, or, 2 or 3 years. And then I also did my CFA at that time, which, not an alternative to your MBA, but it was highly looked upon
Is that
by,
certified financial advisor?
it's a chartered financial analyst.
Oh, okay. All right.
It's a certification that you take. I think it's one test a year for 3 years, and you have to, pass sequentially.
And that
It's
would just give you the experience to analyze, I don't know, financial statements and charts that way. That way.
think of it as it's pretty deep into a number of different areas. Public equities, things like very complex trading strategies like triangular arbitrage, creating synthetic securities, along with mergers and acquisitions and all the regular types of, typical analyst type of things. So it was pretty interesting. I found it very fascinating. And so that was kind of my alternative to getting an MBA.
Mm.
And so then at that point, having that designation along with some really good analytical experience made me pretty marketable to get into private equity.
Gotcha. So getting your CFA, that helps you in like parties, like high bigwig parties and like small talk and stuff, like knowing what they're saying.
I mean, I'm gonna bore somebody to sleep and start talking about it.
Look
Like
at the
dropping.
nerd.
Yeah.
That's good.
So Dan, it sounds like, you got hired on, as an accountant, and after 6 months, you were going to be moved to an investment banking position. It sounds like you were dead set, right? Like you were on this trajectory of, hey, I'm going to work my way up and keep going. Was it just the thought or the plan of making that money that you knew lied ahead for you? Or what was kind of the motivating force for you? Or were you ever like, oh man, I don't know any investment bankers? Were you ever wishy-washy about it or had doubts?
No, once I had learned about, what they do, it intrigued me, intellectually. The money that they were making, that really motivated me as well. And once I got into accounting, I would, for that particular firm, I would just, I willed it and made it happen. I would stay later than everybody. I would do everybody else's accounting work, and then I would find reasons to go talk to investment bankers all the time. So all my free time, I would be hanging out with those guys, asking questions. And I think I just finally pestered them to death that,
Yeah.
hey, this guy's, he's over here. He's a hard worker. He's doing, X, Y, and Z. And so they created a position for me.
Nice. So people back home in Texas asking you about what you're doing, would you say, you wouldn't understand? Or it sounds like they're two different worlds.
Yes. It's I just say it's, boring finance stuff. A lot of times to some of the guys, and, unless they want to, go deeper, but it's can be a little challenging to explain.
Yeah. So then, talk us through the career arc that you were experiencing. I know you said you started, I believe, JDB when you were 29.
That sounds about right. So yeah. Yep.
And so you didn't really hop around to different firms a lot, but something made you want to go out on your own.
Well, I did hop around a little bit there. So after Sheshanoff, I was recruited by a private equity fund that was opening up an office in Phoenix, and that's what got me to Arizona. So I'd gone to New York City, to meet with firms and all the major financial hubs. And when I got a call from the recruiter that said, "Hey, there's a group open up an office in Phoenix," and so, well, I'll go check that out. I didn't know what really Phoenix was from Austin, other than a layover to Vegas. And so, came out there, and the lifestyle that was in Austin, I really liked the Arizona place, and plus the opportunity was good. So decided to go to that firm, and then really fell in love with Arizona. Well, that firm, it was called Bank One Capital Partners, and they were Jamie Dimon, who now runs JP Morgan. At the time, he merged Bank One with First Chicago. And long story short, our firm, the management of our firm, didn't get the mandate to manage the new private equity firm. So it closed down. And I wanted to stay in Arizona.
Were they offering you to go to wherever JP Morgan was, or wherever the new merger bank was?
There were offers of, yes, you could go back to, certain places. And, but I was really, just really wanted to stay there, and pretty entrepreneurial. I wanted to, do something on my own, because private equity was just becoming more popular. And so I tried to partner with one of the managing partners of our firm to start a private equity firm. And we didn't raise enough money for that firm. So then I ended up going to work for the Koch brothers. And they had a private equity firm that just happened to be headquartered in Scottsdale. So the chief strategist from Koch had retired, and the way I understand it is that Charles Koch gave him like $600 million to manage, to kind of keep him close.
Wow. Okay.
And he ended up, that gentleman ended up going back to Wichita, and they closed the firm down, or the fund. They weren't going to do any more investments, and it was babysitting the portfolio companies. And so I was there for, not too long, maybe a couple of years. And that's when I decided to start JDB. Was it
a difficult to, when you went out on your own and you tried to raise funds with that managing partner, was it difficult to overcome was it a disappointment to not raise enough funds, or was it just like, oh, we tried, it didn't work out, move on?
It was very disappointing. It was something that I had really thought timing was great. And as far as the stage where private equity was at that time. So yeah, it was pretty disappointing.
Yeah. And then question that I have on when you're starting an investment capital firm. So a lot of the, us and our listeners are entrepreneurs and start their own thing. For me, it would be really, I know you're used to the space and you had experience, it would be a large barrier to entry to start a private equity firm, because you figure, in my mind, you have to have a lot of money, right? Usually you don't have a lot of money when you're starting your own company. Was that I guess that was always part of the equation for you, but obviously something that you were able to overcome when you started JDP?
Yeah, the thought process was we would use investment banking to keep the lights on and then at the same time, then work on the private equity side, finding opportunities for good investments, and then go raise the capital based on the investment versus because of my age and my career at that point, didn't have a track record to go out and raise a bunch of capital in order to start a private equity fund.
And
So I had to kind of bootstrap it.
yeah. And did you do that on your own?
Yes.
Oh, wow. And so take us through those first few years. Was it, easy rolling or I mean, was there a lot of doubt or what happened?
No, I took about 6 months to a year off after I left the Koch brothers to figure out exactly what I wanted to do. And that's when I started JDB. And I was fortunate once I first started, within a few months, I was able to get an investment banking client. And so it kind of just started from that point forward. And it probably took me a good another 6 or 9 months for that first transaction to close.
Ooh.
To be able to keep the lights on going forward.
That-
And then that kind of built some momentum. So then along came other opportunities on the investment banking side for advisory work.
And then did you add anybody to your company as you were going along?
I did. So I always had a couple of analysts that would help what we call execution. So doing the modeling, doing the due diligence, and helping with the process. And then in about 2007 or 8, I took on a partner that she had retired from investment banking, working with the large firms. She'd worked for Lehman Brothers and Morgan Stanley. And so she had done really well. And was from Arizona, she was from Arizona, worked in New York and San Francisco, and then moved back to Arizona to have a family. And so it was, we both had, very common interest backgrounds. And so thought that was a good fit. And so we partnered. And I think in 07 or 08.
So partnerships and partnering is a huge part of our discussions that we have. They're good and bad, right? And so how is that? Is she still part of your firm, or is that, how did that story unfold?
We worked together for, I think we partnered until the end of 18.
Like
so
10
we
years?
so 10 years. We had a good run together. Great person, but as you know, partnership sometimes can be challenging. Had difference of opinion on a lot of things. My definition of partnership is there's a lot of characteristics that I don't think we always saw eye to eye on. And so there, towards the last couple of years, not being able to see eye to eye on a number of things, and it just made it to where it wasn't as enjoyable anymore. So we decided to part ways and at the end of 18.
Yeah, that's a difficult situation when you're 10 years in, untangling all of the different ins and outs and how partners are part of it. So certainly a learning lesson, I bet.
Yeah.
So
so
Dan,
things change.
Sorry. I want to go back to, so when you left Koch brothers and there's this, what was it, 9-12 months before things start rolling. Are you married at that time?
Married, and just had my first child.
And so what's that like, the feelings coming from your wife, and a lot of pressure, stress? What are you feeling?
Yeah, a lot of pressure, a lot of stress. getting back to that, fear as a motivating driver. Didn't want to fail, and obviously wanted to make sure to provide, but also had a lot of confidence too, that if I know what I'm doing, I just got to have the opportunity.
Yeah.
And have to put myself in the right situation, with the right people.
So it's a never question of, is it going to work out? It's just, I'm going to work hard and I'm going to figure this out.
Correct.
Did your wife always support you in everything you did that way? Or was she like, I don't know, can you go get a job at, I mean, the Koch brothers job is pretty nice.
She had her moments. There were times when she would say, can you just go get a job?
Reliable
what was your
income.
response to that?
What's that?
What was your response to that?
No. That would be absolutely miserable.
Yeah.
Never a consideration for you.
No. Nope. I'm like, sorry, I'm not. I love you, and I promise I'm going to take care of you. This is going to work out. Just got to be patient. But so she would have those moments, but then she was also supportive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So. Yeah. A question that I have, and I was curious to see, I mean, was there ever a moment in time where you thought JDB wouldn't work out?
Oh, of course. Of course. But that was more early on. But yeah.
What typically got you through those moments, and what was your motivating? I mean, you mentioned fear, you mentioned just desperation. Was there anything else that helped you get through those times where it was uncertainty?
I think it was just more of the grit. Just, I'm not going to fail. I know what I'm doing. I know that I'm adding value to the people that I'm working with.
Yeah.
And I know it's going to work. I just have to get through it.
Was there ever a deal that went south to the point where you thought, oh, this may end up, hurting us or being too much to overcome?
There's definitely been some challenges along the way. Some large deals that you're counting on to close, and it's just the industry, especially as an entrepreneur, is not for the faint of heart. I mean, because you don't have a regular paycheck, right? It's very lumpy, so it's hard to plan versus being, Jordan, like in software, where every month something's coming in, right? It's like, or
that recurring revenue. It's
it's the best.
Feels so good.
Yeah. So as an example, I've shared with my kids, I do not recommend that you do what I did. Do not.
Really? So you're saying the same thing your dad was, saying to you, right?
Yeah. No, I would still be in investment banking. I would still do private equity. I just wouldn't do it the way that I did it. Much less stressful ways of doing it. But so to answer your question more directly, were there deals, for example, there was one particular, deal that I'd worked on for a good 18 months, and it was about a $290 million transaction. And I believe the fees on that were going to be about $4 to $5 million, which, at the time would be pretty life-changing. And the deal died 2 days before it closed.
Yeah.
The seller decided he didn't want to sell anymore.
How do you handle that? It's 18 months you've been working on this and you get nothing.
Nothing.
That's just like you just accept it. That's just how it is.
That's
why you tell your kids not to do it.
That's one of the reasons. Absolutely. I mean, and that's happened a couple of times. That was probably the largest dollar amount from someone just changing their mind.
Had you already booked vacations? You're like, all right, baby.
It's not uncommon for me to pre-spend that money.
Yes, I'd already had a couple of ideas in mind.
Plans, right?
Yeah.
That's funny. Well, that's interesting. So okay, I guess transitioning then, you're the year 2023 now. What do you anticipate for your company moving forward? I mean, do you want to continue to grow it as big as you can? have your kids take over, grow it and sell it, retire early? I mean, what are your thoughts on moving forward?
So, good question. I've enjoyed the size that it is, which is small. At one point we grew where I had, general counsel and a real estate group and more analysts and business development people and things of that nature. And I've scaled everything back to where now I primarily outsource a lot of the things that we do. And so going forward, I'm going to do some advisory work, maybe 1 or 2 transactions a year. I really focus more on the private equity side, focusing more on putting capital to work. Very similar, Brandon, what we're doing with Scally.
Yeah. So background on that, I met Dan through my partnership with Scally and Terry. Shout out to episode number 26 if you're interested in hearing more about that. But Dan and Terry, I think, were one of the original, founding members of the Scally Insurance Group there. And Dan, I think your role was as private equity. Is that right? Or just a partner?
Yeah, Terry and I had a friendly relationship, and as friends through some mutual friends over the years. And when Terry shared with me what he was doing again, and obviously he's got a great background and a great reputation and just a good human being. And that's kind of people that we like to partner with.
Yeah.
And so when he said he was going to do this again, I said, I'm in.
Yeah. No questions asked.
Yeah, no questions asked. And then, invested alongside him. And then along the way, doing a lot of the, support and helping, because it's, at early stages, doing a lot of the corporate finance, doing a lot of the analytical work and modeling and things of that nature, and some guidance along those kind of things. We're kind of the value add that we bring
Gotcha.
as a partner.
So just continue to operate at the level that you want to operate until, do you have a perpetuation plan with your family, or are you just thinking at some point to bring somebody on and train them to buy you out?
Yeah, there's really nothing, there's no intrinsic value.
It's your relationships, right? It's like
relationships.
You're the value.
Exactly. And so it's more of, we're going to be looking for, more companies to buy into. But currently we have, 4 investments. They're all on a minority basis, very similar to Scally. So they're on a minority side of things where we don't control them. But we'll also make control investments. So that's going to be a focus on the future, is some more control investments. And then along with, and that provides, there's different opportunities for my family, my kids who are all, 2 of them are in college, and there's 2 more will be going to college here in the next, couple of years. So let them get out the working world a little bit, and then help them on the entrepreneurial side, the ones that want to.
Gotcha. I have a few follow-up questions if you guys don't have any add-ons there, but now that we're at this point in your story, if you were to look back, Dan, what would you do different?
That's a great question. I asked that, of myself quite often, and I probably would not have started JDB at the age that I did. I probably would have stuck with another private equity firm for a number of years, and then built up a track record. And then in my mid to late 30s or 40, because at that point I either would have been a partner at a private equity firm, or I could have left and had a track record to start my own.
That's fascinating. We ask this question a lot, and it's always, I would have done it sooner.
Yeah, that is interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. No, but your point makes sense, because you're saying that, like you said earlier, it's hard to try to advise people when you're that young.
Mm-hmm.
You need a little more gray in the hair, right? Just have some.
You need a track record, really.
Mm-hmm.
And that just takes time.
Right.
So do you think you were too ambitious?
Maybe too naive.
Or do you feel like you were underqualified, or was it strictly just you needed to have the resume? Like, you were still able to do the deals.
Yeah, no, I think it was the resume, and it was also the location. So
Okay.
I definitely wouldn't have done it in there because Arizona, there's, to put it, into perspective, I think when we were doing the business development and focused on companies that, 10 million in revenue to 300 million in revenue, let's say, in our database, we would have, I think, 1,200 in Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, and kind of what we were focusing on. And I think in Southern California, it was 30 something thousand.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So the pool was very small here. So, and if I was going to, another thing I would go back and do differently, if I were going to do it, I wouldn't have done it in Arizona.
You wouldn't have done it in
But,
Arizona.
but there's always the quandary of that too, though, because from a lifestyle perspective, I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed my kids growing up here. Had a great, quality of life here, and versus living in a major financial hub from my perspective.
Yeah.
Right. So,
And
so
then,
I mean, so from a financial perspective, I think I could have done much better and faster and differently in a different market, but I don't think I would have enjoyed the quality of life as much. So that trade-off is, and I'm perfectly fine with that trade-off.
You would have made that trade-off again, going
Yeah.
back. Yeah.
And then I always like to ask this question, Dan. So you have a lot of experience, a lot of wisdom, a lot of insight. If you were to talk to a younger Dan in college, coming out of college, or to any of our listeners that are looking to be like Dan and go out and do their own thing, what advice would you give them? What would you tell them in that short time frame to say, look out for this, do this, don't do that?
Great question. Something I share with my kids often is just take your time, don't get in a rush, but learn as much as you can. Learn from those around you, and to help you figure out the direction you want to go. And like having a mentor, having someone that you aspire to be like, and from a career perspective. And it's okay. The problem I think too, though, is, and if I go back to my younger self, I knew what I wanted to do. Sometimes when people don't know what they want to do, it's a little more challenging. But once you get into that area, once you focus on one area, just outwork everybody else too. Put in the grit. Don't take it for granted. And just do not waver on character, because you only have one reputation.
Yeah. And wakeboard in the mornings.
That's right.
That's good. That's good advice for sure for all of us, I know. Awesome. Gentlemen, do you have any other questions?
I do.
Okay.
Dan, so you're in a lot of different industries. I think your breadth of business knowledge has to be just like very immersive. You're going to know a lot of things. What are some amazing business ideas that you think would be a really good idea for someone to start, that, you don't have to share your secrets, the ones you're kind of keeping for yourself, but that you're not going to do, but you think you really wish someone would make a business around this?
I'm not really good at the startup thing.
I see.
But I would say, more on the lines of where I have some personal interest right now is more on like natural health.
Okay.
I think that, and wellness. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. As there's a big shift in sentiment from big pharma to more natural types of remedies or supplements or things of that nature. So I think that is one that has a lot of growth ahead of it.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, sure. Our understanding in general of health is changing a lot, and so great. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Dan, thanks so much for your story.
Appreciate it.
Really appreciate you coming on and sharing everything you did. Really interesting career that you've had, and I'm sure there's much more to be written. I'm sure you're not done with it yet. So we appreciate you coming on and sharing your wisdom with us. If you want to, you can find out more about JDB Capital. You can search them online. I know I saw Dan on LinkedIn, and so you can reach out to him there. But otherwise, appreciate your information.
Appreciate the time, guys.
All right.
And thanks for having me.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Dan. You were great.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks for listening to the Founders Podcast. Be sure to follow the host on Twitter. Search @JordB and @BrandonMinert to discuss more. Also, be sure to visit thefounderspod.com to join the conversation, access the show notes, and discover our fantastic bonus content.